Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be back with you this week. I was gone last week, and it's good to have our visitors back with us and everything. So last week, Grady taught the class. He gave a short thing, but he taught on was the fruit of the Spirit, right? And so this class is actually going to be somewhat similar to that because we're in the middle of talking about 2 Peter chapter 1, and he goes through a similar list of Christian qualities or virtues that we also need to make sure that we embody in our lives and act in our lives. So if you will, haven't already, turn to 2 Peter chapter 1, and we'll do a little bit of review on the first few verses of that chapter, verses 3 and 4 especially that we got 2 weeks ago. Since it was 2 weeks ago, we probably don't remember what it was about. So, Steve, can you read 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4?
As his divine power is given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us by glory and virtue, by which have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises, that through these you may be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust.
So there's a lot of things to talk about in a very sort of long sentence. And what is it that God has given us in that verse? What is it that He's given to Christians to have? Well, that's what He has given. That's what has given to us. God, through His divine power, has given us what?
All things that pertain to godliness.
All things that pertain to godliness. So, and we talked about, is that what yours says? All things that pertain to godliness? Yeah. So there's some versions are more literal and say like life and godliness. But what is meant by this, like it says, is all things that pertain to a godly life. He's furnished us everything that we need in this sort of journey to godliness. And in that next verse, it's even more profound sounding, at least. It says that we have become partakers of the divine nature through these things. And so the goal for Christians is while we currently partake of the divine nature in a limited sense, is to continue that into eternity. And partially we talked about this through having these qualities that God Himself has, such as sinlessness, deathlessness, or immortality, but also virtue and moral excellence. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is that latter aspect of moral excellence that Peter says is a very important part of the Christian journey, an essential part even. So, can someone read the next three verses, 5, 6, and 7 for us? Oh, thank you.
For this reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness, knowledge, and to knowledge, self-control, and to self-control, perseverance, and to perseverance, godliness, and to godliness, mutual affection, and to mutual affection, love.
Yes. So there.
I won't keep you.
Okay. Keep going.
For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. But whoever does not have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from the past.
Okay. Yeah, this is definitely important for us. Well, no, we might get to those last verses. We're definitely going to try and get to verse 7. But we're going to go each of these virtues somewhat individually, but really practically based. I don't know if that's sort of what Brady did last time, but what he does say is that in this list of virtues, there's 7 of them here. And of these 7 virtues, we're supposed to embody them, add them to our faith, and build them upon our faith. And we're going to talk about each of them and get very practical in some of them as well. And some of these, maybe whenever you read them, we can redefine, maybe hone in on some of the concepts on what familial or brotherly affection really is, what behaviors that refers to. And so I want us to go through this. Think about what specific behaviors is it that each of these entails. And obviously some of them are very broad. Like one of them says, add goodness or virtue, as mine translates it. Add virtue to your faith or faithfulness. And that's a big, broad concept that has a lot of things under it. But we'll talk about it in a little bit. So again, God supplies everything that we need, and He's listed 7 virtues, and this is very similar to other lists of Christian qualities that we're supposed to have. I included one from a later Christian work, not in the New Testament, on the top of there, that was written in the early 2nd century AD, and it takes a lot from other lists of virtues, from say Romans 5 and James, and also. Second Peter has a lot of similarities, and especially the form where it says one leads into the other or gives birth to the next. So it's like A, then B, then B, then C, then C, then D, and so forth on. Kind of you see the pattern. But what we can learn from this passage is that we don't become good or like God or virtuous by accident. It's not that you get baptized and you become a Christian and then you're automatically never going to sin ever again or make a mistake. You're not going to automatically get rid of all those problems, all those habits that you have been a part of your life up to that point. And so being a Christian entails being purposeful and having a plan and putting in effort to have these virtues in your lives. So it's not just something that you're completely happy with. Right? And what is the language that Peter uses in verse 5 to describe how would you go about this?
This is giving all diligence.
Giving all diligence. What are other things?
Making every effort. Make every effort.
Make every effort. So it's like, again, it's a lot about your own effort, and it has to do with intense focus as well. So it's very important that he's emphatically saying make every effort, not just in your spare time or when it's convenient for you. It's supposed to be effortful for us. Okay. Now, faith and virtue. These are the first 2 things mentioned in our list. So whenever you hear faith, you said goodness in your version for goodness. I think that's pretty good translation, because virtue sort of is the general quality of goodness that embodies a lot of other things. But faith, when we think of faith, what behaviors or actions does that entail? Trust. Okay, trust. That's still a little too abstract for me. What does trust entail? If you say that you have trust in someone, what does that mean in terms of your actions?
What they say is going to happen will happen.
Yes, so you act as if what they say is going to happen will happen. That's good. So let's take this idea. I think that's a great idea of trust. If we took everything that Jesus said as fact and we really trusted in it, how would that change the way that we act in our lives? What are some promises maybe that He gives us on which actions should be based?
Well, you would want to do His commands because you kind of have that belief that it is a two-way street, that He's going, promising, kind of promise for each other.
Yes. Yeah, so He's going to take care of it, and so you're going to do it. Just following along and being faithful is He's going to take care of you in that, no matter what happens. So I think faith, sometimes it can be too cognitively oriented, where it's just like, I agree to this set of beliefs, and that's what we're looking at. I wanted to get us down. It's actually a set of behaviors too. It affects greatly our life. And that's why faith in the English word and all its connotations can be a little misleading sometimes for how we use it in our common language and all its religious baggage of how it can be used or misused. And I think allegiance or faithfulness can oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes in the New Testament, give a better sense of what this quality involves. Because if you trust also, but you're faithful to someone that you trust with, that you trust their promises, what they're going to offer you, that their relationship to you, that they're not going to leave you or forsake you or abandon you. So you're going to be faithful to those. You're going to declare allegiance to God. He showed his allegiance and his faithfulness to us even when we were not faithful. And so that's what our faith and our faithfulness and allegiance is based upon. That's probably a better way to think about this. And this is, as the first in the list, it is sort of the basis, the foundation upon which we build upon the other Christian virtues. Right? It's the why for Christian action. We do it because he was faithful to us, so we are going to be faithful to him. And love also goes into that as the very end and last of the list is love. Are there any other comments on faith? But if we were to try to think about more before we go on to this, what is Belle has some either objections or comments to make herself. But let's try to think, what did a life of faithfulness or allegiance to Christ look like? What is the general attitude orientation of that? Talk about it a little bit, but I think it's important.
It requires.
Yeah.
You should act the way he says is best to act.
Act the way he says is best to act. You trust in him and his way thing. So that means, like, if you're going to declare allegiance to Jesus, that you're not going to argue with him about the way you should live your life. Now, there is the point of where you need to understand what is it that he wants to live, trying to understand what he says in its own context and not misconstruing his words. But you're not going to argue with him itself if he tells you to do something. So that's part of what faithfulness implies. You're not going to abandon him either in that life to be allegiant to the King and Savior. Okay, so virtue is a sort of moral excellence or goodness, as Mark's version has. And so in ancient Greek thought, that virtue is famously they often talked about 4 different qualities that they would have. And whether Peter means all of these in the term virtue, I don't know. But it's good to at least think about how they thought about virtue. They talked about 4 different things: justice or righteousness, prudence, or this is a practical wisdom, how to apply practical application of it, and then courage. I've heard lots of essays on courage and how it's sort of the foundation for other parts of wisdom, because in order to act out and do these other things, you have to have courage. And then there's temperance or moderation, not doing anything to excess. So being able to have self-control. So, and some of these are mentioned in here, so especially temperance. Although a different word is used than traditionally in Greek, it's still the same concept of having self-control, temperance. So these are different virtues that they have. But what actions can we take to be more faithful and enact these virtues in life? What specific actions can we take? I mean, or anything that relates to it. Because there's no sense in talking about virtue if we're not going to strive for it. You can even just talk about one of these aspects.
courage, trust that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. Trust that, like for an example, and this might be an extreme example, when Jesus called Peter out to walk on the water, Peter trusted him because of who he is at first. And then his courage waned and he slipped into the water. But for us, our example would be, if we trust Jesus, we live like he teaches us to live. We don't have to be worried about what the world's going to do to us because Jesus is going to
Yeah. I think
one way or the other.
courage is a good one to focus on, right? Courage. Let's keep going with courage. How do we live more courageously as Christians? You mentioned one way we don't fear the judgment that comes from the world. But let's think about just with our action or words, courage with our words, how we talk about related to Jesus. How do we? Yeah, Mark, you had a comment.
Courage is something that doing something that you fear, doing it anyway. Maybe doing it with the start, not doing it once, and then it gets easier over time.
Yeah.
Door knocking.
Yeah, and I use that as an example. I went down. What's your, I don't know. I think it's just that road down Belmont Street, and it's I went down that and we were just inviting people to our gathering that we're going to have, and not just in church in general. And while a lot of people weren't home, but I got to have like two good conversations and a third conversation that was all right. And it was really good, but I do not like going up to strangers' houses and doing that because it makes me extremely uncomfortable. But I did it anyway, that's something I'm trying to repent of personally. So I did that as sort of a way to repent of my lack of courage for myself. Really what's interesting is that the only way to have courage is to be courageous. You kind of have to act it out yourself. And then it becomes more convincing. It becomes a part of your character to do that. So that's an example of there trying to be more courageous in just a small way. It's not like, I really should be afraid of those things anyway, for the most part. Though. Okay. Any other comments before I move on?
I think of it as doing the hard things, that you're told to do, taking a stand, being silent when you're supposed to be silent. Uh, those are really important things. Because if you go along with the peer pressure of the crowd, I don't distinctively different on you as a Christian than the rest of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. You have to be willing to stand out. It takes courage to stand out and to do the hard things whenever everyone else is doing. So that is a very difficult part.
I think these are things that we can study as well. There's a lot of things that have been written out there about all these virtues. Stoicism. There's a lot of writings about examples of how to have courage, how to step out, what is prudence to me?
Yeah.
And how do you practice prudence? Before you make any big decision, you wait overnight, see if it's the same decision you make the next day. There are ways to do these things. If we want to make every effort to add them, we can read about it all in the Bible, and there's lots and lots of stuff out there written about it that we can study.
You're right.
These habits.
Yeah, studying has been something we've done to do that. Yeah, studying it is very beneficial because sometimes, if you read like ancient philosophy, especially Plato, one of the things that you hear Socrates debating about is he debates about one of these virtues like justice in the Republic or courage and other dialogue. And he ends up saying our concept of these things is often very wrong. Like just showing logically how we're very wrong about our own human concepts of these things and trying to arrive at the truth. What is justice according to God's definition of justice? Or what is courage in God's definition of courage? And so it does take study to know what are these things that we're striving for in the first place. So that's a great point to add. So yeah, so study them and enact them as well. I think some of these more the general knowledge of courage too. There's some very obvious ways we can enact courage that we've talked about, but if the more you study it, the more you'll realize there's other areas in life where that practice this as well. So the next two, add to your virtue knowledge. So knowledge, as we've already seen, we studied a couple weeks ago, it's a major feature of 2 Peter, but also in general of what the apostles taught, and especially Paul's letters. We think about Paul saying, we are saved by faith alone, and how we construe that a couple times of what faith means. He does place great importance on knowledge. And so we can look at any of those passages, those are 3 of big passages, where he says that he prays for the churches to abound in knowledge, to grow in their knowledge of Jesus. And remember in Philippians, we talked about this a lot, it was one of the themes of Philippians. It was that he wanted them to grow in a knowledge of Jesus in order that they may know what's best. Not just what is good, but what's best for them. So this is a major feature of teaching. We'll actually save that question for next. We'll save that for a second. There's 2 questions. So that other question, what forms of knowledge will help us grow as Christians? Because it's very generic on knowledge here. How can knowledge help us to grow?
Helps us to understand God's will. We were studying on the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs shows that, I know we're talking about knowledge, and Proverbs talks about both knowledge and wisdom. But that godly wisdom only comes through God by asking and He will grant it. But by talking to other Christians, by having discussions like this, by studying, by praying, all of those things will help us to grow in knowledge, I believe.
Yeah, those things can help us to grow in knowledge, praying, studying, and all these different types of study. But what kind of knowledge? How can maybe even knowledge outside of just knowledge of Scripture? What other types of knowledge can be beneficial, helps to Christian? Because I think most people in general think knowledge is beneficial. Hence why we have colleges and why we have it plays such an emphasis on education and culture. So how do other forms of knowledge even help us as Christians? Not that it's sufficient in itself, but. Okay, taking knowledge of let's take history. How does knowledge of history, how could that help us as Christians?
Help us to learn from our forefathers' mistakes and our forefathers' successes.
Yeah, you can learn examples of good and bad from previous history. The Bible helping you understand what good and bad is, then you can use that and apply the knowledge of history too, right?
Just general knowledge of the world, how the world works, and knowledge of human nature, and knowledge of practical knowledge about if you do this, then this will happen. So those are fundamental.
Yeah.
This might be crossing into more the kind of the wisdom component, but kind of just the kind of like the knowledge of, well, I guess more like for the application of, or so you have this knowledge, now what do you do with it?
Yeah.
So, so I mean, that's kind of different than straight up knowledge itself, but obviously the knowledge, if you have all this book learning and don't know how to apply it, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. So the way I can put it is that the Bible gives us a really good foundation of wisdom, and we can take all these other realms of knowledge and sort of subject them to that. That's how a lot of ancient Christians thought about, even Jews thought about other secular forms of knowledge, as we say, secular. And they can all be applied and used in a Christian way. So you can use history, you can use mathematics, you can use classes on leadership, classes on all sorts of other even practical or theoretical disciplines, and use them to help you grow as a Christian in your faith, your belief, and knowledge. And that's a much larger discussion we have today. But one challenge I have for you, if you are someone who learns and reads and tries to understand, how is it that you can use that knowledge, those tools, to help you in your Christian life? Try to apply that. Try to seek the benefit that comes from that and apply it to your spirituality. There's usually something, even though knowing the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, it's immediately doesn't seem very applicable to your faith. But I'm sure there's lots of stuff in biology and cellular biology that can help in your faith in some way. But I'm not the person to talk about cellular biology and how it can help very well. I'm not an expert.
Even like ancient history, studying that and gaining a knowledge of ancient history kind of helps in the fact that more and more stuff is being understood that points to, I mean, we know that the story of Christ is more than just a story, but it can be proven through ancient history, or it can be backed up through ancient history. It's proven by the Bible, but it can, so that's one way I think that history helps anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And
The knowledge.
that kind of gets on another point that I was trying to is that all of these other forms of knowledge can really help us to understand the Bible too. You can come to the Bible and you can read it, and most of the time you can understand it and its general message very easily. But but there's other parts that are more difficult for us as modern people, very far distance and thousands of years from when it was written. To kind of understand some of the points of what's happening. We don't know how to read ancient wisdom literature like the Bible is written to be. And so learning about it and the knowledge of those things can really help you. That's why they're specialists in that sort of field, to help the church and help people grow and knowledge. So that is one thing. So ancient history can be one of them. Learning ancient languages can be another thing that can help you, such as Greek and Hebrew and Latin. So yeah, there's other things that can help you to grow as you grow. Now self-control. To add to your knowledge, self-control. So self-control, I would say there's one virtue from this list that I think it would be great if Christians would have more of that in general in the world. Self-control, especially in our age, is very important because we have so much abundance. It's very hard, according to our natural inclinations, to always go towards those things that it's hard to practice self-restraint, self-control. We can think of this from any sort of natural desire that can be taken and distorted. So we have to have control over those natural desires that is good, even for good things. Yeah, it's self-control talked about several times. It's the last fruit of the Spirit mentioned in Galatians. So how can we practice self-control more in our lives as Christians? How can we practice self-control more?
One way is we've been talking about every Wednesday night for the last couple months. But like for me, for instance, getting angry in traffic and that study that we've been doing has helped me to to use more so. So that and Tristan pointing out whenever I do it, he's writing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, you practice self-control more through self-awareness and through, you did it partially through pointing out some of your own behaviors that didn't really work.
right.
So it helps, self-awareness can help lead to self-control. For instance, the same thing, I think dieting is something that everyone can kind of, at some point, has probably tried and probably has realized it's very hard to sustain for a long period of time. Because it requires a lot of self-control over periods of time. And there's certain things that help contribute to it, like not putting yourselves in situations where you have to have insane amounts of self-control. If you're on a diet, don't go into the middle of the dessert aisle when you're at your most hungry point in the day. If you're, don't keep a bunch of junk food in your house that you don't want to eat, or you don't want to eat whenever your weaker self throughout the day. So there's lots of ways we can practice it. But one is the way that we can practice it. Practice it also in terms of our behavior, our other behaviors. You had anger. You mentioned anger. What other behaviors can we practice self-control? Think specific or general.
Speech in general.
Yeah, speech in general. What are some ways that we can lack control of speech? That's a big theme in the book of James, is how we have a hard time controlling our tongues. James chapter 3.
Right.
So,
Ben mentioned it either last week or I think it was last week about how, and he used the military specifically, but it can apply to any line of work. But in the military, sometimes it's like when you're deployed and you're around other people using their tongues that way, it's kind of hard not to be sucked into that. And so you have to use self-control that even though you're in an environment where it's happening, to have self-control and not be part of it.
yeah.
Not to encourage it or be part of it.
Yeah, and while we can't avoid every situation,
Right.
I was in the sauna yesterday at the gym, and the college students are all back, and there was a big group of frat guys that came in, like 7 of them, dude. Like some things they said just made me laugh. Like, they were talking all sorts of stupid things. And it's stupid, but and then they said, "Oh, man, we got so many stupid freshmen here," and I was just like chuckling, like that was probably you just a year ago. It was like, I mean, like it's like, come on, like it's just funny. So in that environment, I wasn't really tempted there, but I bet some of those guys said things that they probably wouldn't have wanted to say around their parents or
There's a group psychology that makes things do things a bit more narrowly.
yeah, that's in the book of Proverbs too, talking about that. Yes, Jeff.
I don't know why, but I can't pops in my head if I think about self-control. I automatically think, where am I out of control? Like what part of my life is out of control? It's not being, I'm not being master of it. I'm not controlling it. And one area might be time. There's probably things that I could spend my time doing that's better than what I, so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what parts of your life do you not exhibit self-control in? And that's definitely one that really is easy. Where do you not have it, and then how do you change it? That's a very simple way to think about how can I easily improve in this area, or at least easily find areas of improvement.
Just one area would be if I just, I've got time with nothing planned, then I get on my phone and watch a YouTube video or where I could use that time more wisely, right? There's things that I think we just have to work on trying to identify in ourselves. What are things that we tend to let control us versus we control it, whatever.
Yeah, that's That's true. That's true. I mean, this is an area I think, and it's kind of hard to think because people are like, stop being a control freak, but we are allowed to be, I think, maybe somewhat more control freaks over our own selves and behavior. God wants us to have self-control. There is a sense in which you need to trust God and His control over all the other things, but He wants us to have control over ourselves. That is the one thing that we need to try to have control over. Everything else we can't really control. To trust God. We can go through one more. Endurance. We'll go through endurance and leave piety and brotherly affection for next week. Along with faith and endurance, or along with love and faith, endurance is one of the most commonly mentioned Christian virtues. So let's go to let's just go to some of these. So let's go to Romans chapter 5. So we'll go to Romans chapter 5 for it. And another person go to James chapter 1. These are two different lists of virtues, which are Christian qualities that we want to have in endurance.
Go to James.
You go and read Romans 5. Actually, make sure I want to get the full part of that one. Romans 5. Romans 5, 3 through 5.
I got it. Not only so, but we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us.
So here, there's again a chain of virtues that are listed. Endurance or perseverance. It's one of the same word. Steve, can you read James 1, 3, and 4?
James 1, 3, 4. Knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing.
Yeah. And that's the end of a little short list as well. So testing produces patience and endurance. And so and the most important part of that endurance is that it's needed, especially by those Christians, because so many causes of discouragement. The world was not for them. It was very against them. They lived in a very hostile environment. And they were persecuted much more than today. Now we need endurance for the opposite reason. So remember in the parable of the soils, there was the sort of the one that fell by the wayside that the birds picked it up, and those represented the persecution. At least what I remember. Maybe I'm misremembering Luke's where it says in Luke what it means. But then there's the thorns, which is the desires for wealth and riches choking you out. That can be sometimes where we struggle because we don't really face persecution in the same way. We face temptations of our own desires that Satan uses and stuff. So endurance is needed even then. Yeah.
Early part of Revelation is focusing on churches and how they did not persevere in faith. They did not endure. They lost their first love. And so those are good examples of not enduring.
Revelation is very important or very emphatic on that. I believe it's mentioned 6 times in Revelation on the need for endurance, maybe even more than that. I know. But with the church being written in chapters 2 and 3, endurance is a very important aspect of what Christ is wanting to tell us. Yeah. How is endurance related to other virtues listed in 2 Peter 5:7? So how is, for instance, endurance related to self-control? We just talked about.
You just got to keep on keeping on. You just got to keep that. I think of it as you know, not losing the reason that you're living the life you're living. Sometimes you get caught up in the world and you forget about self-control, forget about one of these other virtues. So you just gotta keep that in mind, being mindful of who you are at all times.
Yeah. Be mindful of whose you are at all times. So mindfulness helps us to endure, of remembering, not forgetting.
Can you have endurance without self-control?
I don't think so. I mean, it's like because you're controlling your course by having endurance. I mean, if you want to, this isn't really good to do this, but trying to look at the etymology of endurance in Greek is just means to remain under something, to stay under pressure for a period of time. So that's really what it's about. If you think about it, it's patience and long suffering and continuing even when it gets hard. And that takes self-control to do.
Is this, the way this is written, is this, you need to kind of get this one before the next?
So
You know what I mean? Like,
people have commented on it. It's probably not. It's probably more stylistic here, not saying that this is a list that you have to go through in sequential order. It's not really doing that because love is the very end. So it's like wait to love people until the very end. And that's not what it's saying, right? That doesn't make any sense. But it's rather showing how it's really emphatically showing how they're related to one another. They feed off of each other, and to kind of think about the Greeks, if you have one virtue, you have them all. But it's very important to look at these and try to think about specific behaviors related to them, how we can practice.
the text, speaking about endurance, the text actually talks about these qualities in increasing measure. So there's an idea that you're working on these things.
Yeah.
Um, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. But if anyone does not have them, they are nearsighted. So again, nearsighted to me, nearsightedness means I can't see the big picture. I can't see the result of the end. So therefore, I won't tend to endure through it.
Yeah, and even that nearsightedness and blindness, it's really has to do with your forgetfulness, which it also mentions next, right? We'll talk more about that next week. But you're right. That's the problem is that we forget the grace of God and what He's done for us, and so we're not responding appropriately to that grace. And in the ancient world, reciprocity was of the utmost importance to be a person worthy. If someone did something gracious to you, you tried to show allegiance to that person. And that's all that faith is supposed to do, is you're supposed to be loyal to your patron who has given you everything that you possibly need for life. That's what you live for, because that is your life. And so that's what this is about. And being nearsighted is looking only to the most immediate and the world around you and its values instead of the higher values, the promises of God, that we are very important to Peter.
I would imagine that all of us have these virtues about something. There's something in our life where we are have self-control about a particular thing. And so I think adding to it, increasing measure is having it in everything, especially things that aren't good for us.
You're right. And we need to, we can hopefully find areas where we have some of these things, like some people here exercise and they've been consistent about things and had endurance in some form, maybe physical endurance, and that can be a very beneficial metaphor for life. And I think that's why, honestly, personally, I think that's why we love sports, men love sports so much, is because that contest that we watch and participate in is like a great metaphor for life in general oftentimes. Whether it be one of endurance, like whenever you watch the movie Rocky or something, someone who's going the distance and you're an endurance runner, your goal is to finish and finish well. Or whether it's to win the game against the bad guys, the opponents. These things, these same mentalities that you apply to these other areas of life, apply them to your spiritual life, and enacting things there, because it's far more important than far more rewarding. As our verse from 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, train yourself in godliness. For bodily training is of some value, but godliness or piety is valuable in every way. So it's even more important to work on these other areas. Last question. What are strategies or practices we can do to maintain spiritual focus during difficult times? Because that's what a lot of endurance is about. Staying in, maybe, let's think about that. Encouragement. How do we seek out encouragement from others, other sources? Because discouragement is something that Christians can face very frequently.
Listen, don't give up on meeting of yourselves together as is the habit of some, but encourage one another daily.
Meet together frequently. Yes, you're right. Meet together frequently because that's where you're supposed to encourage one another every day while it is still called today, as the author of Hebrews says. So, you try to, maybe in a way to think about it also is the opposite. How can I be that person for someone else? How can I be that encouragement to other people today? Maybe, I don't know what every person's going through. I try to know what people are going through, but I always try to hopefully be an encouragement to people, that are discouraged and not feeling good. Because during those times that we can be the most likely to slip up and fall into temptation and not endure. I know prayer is something that people often go to for certain as an answer for most things, and it's true for this too. There's been times when I've needed endurance to remain faithful, to not to resist temptation, and praying was what I did. Praying for even an hour straight to try to help focus my mind on the things that are important, on different things, and asking God for help. That's another thing we need to ask for endurance. Any other comments before we end the class? Okay, well, hopefully we can have plenty of things that we can think about for our own lives. What is it that we can work on? What is it that we can, how is it that we can make every effort to add these things and increase in these things throughout our lives? And we'll continue this study of these things next week. We will. Okay.